Each late summer night of the annual Edinburgh Festival is marked by a military tattoo. It's breathtaking. Massed regiments advancing through the gatehouse of the city's brooding castle, to drums flourishing and the skirl of the pipes. Yet some of these tartan stalwarts hail from lands oceans away from the highlands and lowlands of bonnie Scotland. From Canada. From Australia. Among the thousands of spectators are visitors from Australia and New Zealand, nations plump with Scottish blood. And from Canada and the U.S., their phone directories fattened on Scottish names. And there are spectators here from places where Scottish immigrants have rarely set foot. It sometimes seems that everyone wants a swatch of tartan. And so come the visitors, not only for the stupendous Edinburgh Festival, but for the everyday, every season festival of Scotland itself. One of the last great wilderness areas of Europe, Scotland is the northernmost reach of the British Isles. With a population of over 5 million, its land area is a bit larger than that of the Canadian province of New Brunswick, and about the size of the American state of Maine. Its southernmost point lies 1,000 miles north of the latitudes of New York. Yet the residual warmth of the Gulf Stream awash Scotland's west coast induce palms to grow and semi-tropical gardens to flourish. Touring Scotland will take you to the Borders, where loom the splendid abbeys built by King David I, moody testaments to Scotland's bloodied history. The lilting landscapes of Dumfries and Ayr, stamping grounds of that most famous of Scottish poets, Robert Burns. The metropolis of Glasgow, which, with invincible spirit, transformed itself from an industrial monster to the Cinderella city of the British Isles. Ringed by woods and mountains, the bonny banks of Loch Lomond. The all-season grandeur of the Western Highlands, and the haunting vale of Glencoe, where the MacDonalds were treacherously murdered. Culloden's bleak moor, site of the last great battle fought on British soil. Island hopping in the Hebrides. Enchanted Iona, over the sea to Skye, and Lewis and Harris. Inverness, sometimes called the capital of the Highlands, and Loch Ness, where, according to those who claim to have seen it over the past 1,400 years, there lurks a huge monster called Nessie. The wind-battered Orkneys and Shetlands. The glistening granite city of Aberdeen. Glamis Castle, where tradition sets the murder of King Duncan by Macbeth. Scotland being mother and nurse of the game called golf, golfers galore come from everywhere to play the course at St. Andrews, which is 800 years old. The Firth of Forth, and all Scotland's capital, highlands and low, the festival city of Edinburgh. This is the Scotland of the ballad and the bonny brae, of the wee dram and the dry wit, of the verse, the ditty, and the song, the glory and the grandeur. Human beings hugging these rugged coasts hunted and fished here some 6,000 years ago. We don't know who they were. We have no name for them. About 2,000 years ago, tribes that were Scotland's first historical inhabitants banded together, loosely forming a nation. The Romans, who at the time occupied what is now England, called these tribesmen the Picts, meaning painted men, because the Picts painted themselves blue.
Leave those savages to their spiky mountains and bottomless lakes,
was the Romans' attitude. Being consummate engineers, they constructed colossal fortified walls, Hadrian's Wall, and the Antonine, shutting out the wild men of the north. The walls still stand. Today, they're barely sufficient to keep out a stray collie. Yet they've become a stony symbol of the unscalable barrier separating the Scots from the English. After the Roman legions left Britannia, the Britons invaded, and the Angles. That was in the 5th century. And from Ireland, the Gaelic-speaking Scots, who gave the country its name. Then a final element was introduced into the population, the Norse. In the 9th century, Vikings came to plunder, but stayed to settle. Scotland became a mismatch of cantankerous lowlands and unconquerable highlands, a great brawl of feuding families and petty kingdoms. But under King Kenneth MacAlpin, a united Scottish kingdom began taking shape over 1,000 years ago, and a rampant lion came to symbolize that kingdom. This is Scone Palace, original site of the Stone of Destiny. This is the place where Scotland's kings were crowned.
"1,500 to 1,000 years ago, this was one of 3 capitals of the Scots kingdom of Dalriada. This rock-hewn footprint and this font were sacred objects in the ancient rituals of kingship.
For centuries, the English, who to this day the Scots call Sassenachs, encroached on Scottish soil and Scottish rights. Scotland bred its defenders, William Wallace, and Robert the Bruce, who 6,000 fighting Scots whipped an English force of 20,000 here at Bannockburn. Who then are these wild men and women of the north? Picts, Gaels, Celts, and Norsemen. Today they're all Scots. Scottish, never Scotch. Scotch is the whiskey most imbibed throughout the world. Scotch describes a buttery shortbread and a game in which children hop, but never the nationality of Scotland's people. From this land, breathtaking to behold, but topped by poor soil, comes a people of confounding contradictions. Frugal, but at times generous to a fault. Excessively practical, yet romantic. Hard-nosed, yet sentimental. Dour, yet endowed with a wry sense of humor. Despite centuries of an austere kirk that molded the Scots' sturdy character, Calvin, oatcakes, and sulphur, there's an often unresisted temptation to put faith into banshees and haunting spirits. Indeed, touring this land, a traveler is tempted to believe in spooks himself. Scotland holds only 10% of the population of the United Kingdom, Yet outstanding Scots who grace a who's who in Britain far exceed that percentage. Philosopher David Hume, James Watt, inventor of the steam engine, and opera diva Mary Garden, and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, creator of Sherlock Holmes, and Sir Alexander Fleming, discoverer of penicillin, and on and on. The impact the Scots have made throughout the whole world is even more remarkable. From Nova Scotia, New Scotland, to British Columbia, Scots provided a large share of both the brains and brawn that built Canada. Alexander Mackenzie was born in Scotland, as was Alexander Graham Bell. 13 of the signers of the American Declaration of Independence bore Scottish names. The father of Alexander Hamilton was born in Scotland. So was the father of the United States Navy, John Paul Jones. And Andrew Carnegie. He was born here in Dunfermline. Today, there is being peddled a pre-packaged stereotype of a Scotsman. Clan shops retail tartans by the yard. The roots of a visitor's family tree can be grafted onto those of a noble Highland laird, probably named Jock. It is as foolhardy to encapsulate Scotland as kilts, haggis, and whiskey as it would be for a Scot to regard America as no more than Levi's, hot dogs, and martinis. As with folk everywhere, Scots are best seen in their mother landscape. Scotland is land, bens, crags, braes, glens. Scotland is water, burns, rivers, firths, and lochs. Scotland is places, from castles to crofts, from its Athens of the north to its far-flung North Sea islands. Being called the Borders should in no way imply that this region is only of borderline interest. Just follow the river banks to Kelso, Melrose, Dryborough, and Jedburgh, towns flanking the ancient Roman wall which thrust north from England. In the 12th century, under the great Scottish King David I, these towns saw a frenzy of church building. 4 splendid abbeys arose, sealing the town's royal pedigrees. Kings were crowned here. But the Borders had always been a battlefield between the Scots and the Sassenachs. Centuries of armed clashes turned them into ruins. Now they stand as testaments to a bloody history. To wild cheering from the townsfolk, young horsemen spurred their mounts southward. Each year from towns such as Peebles and Selkirk and Galashiels, the Border lads gallop to the Welcome to Scotland signs and proclaim in clarion voices the abiding freedoms of the Scots to the English south. These are called the Common Ridings. At the center of the Borders, overlooking the River Tweed, stands Abbotsford House, home of one of the most widely read writers of the 19th century, Sir Walter Scott.
I'm Jean Maxwell Scott, and I'm a great-great-great-granddaughter of Sir Walter Scott, whose portrait by Sir Henry Raeburn you see here.
It's a shrine to visitors weaned on Scots Rob Roy and Ivanhoe.
Gretna Green, and there's a wedding in progress. Traditionally, Scottish blacksmiths were empowered to perform weddings. And why not? Since a smith had the power to wed 2 metals to each other, making them one. Some centuries ago, Scotland was the place that English couples eloped to from the other side of the Borders.
In accordance with ancient Scottish law, very gladly pronounce you to be husband and wife.
Dumfries and Galloway of the southern uplands, a region of hills and mountains and coastal plains. This is Robert Burns' country. Set by the waters of the Irish Sea, Culzean Castle is the showplace of Ayrshire. A medieval stronghold magnificently redesigned by Robert Adam and built in the late 1700s, it crowns a country park of 560 acres. Its owner today is the National Trust of Scotland, which restores and maintains over 100 such historic properties. Inevitably, Culzean summons memories of Dwight D. Eisenhower as the Supreme Commander of Allied forces in World War II. In 1945, a grateful Scottish nation presented Eisenhower with a spacious apartment in the castle for his use for the rest of his life. Ike, as he was called, and his family came here frequently to get away from it all. Ike liked to golf, and the Ayrshire coast harbors a golfer's dream resort, Turnberry. This windswept site was the setting for the 1986 British Open duel between Jack Nicklaus and Tom Watson. The British Open is often played here. There are 2 courses at Turnberry, and of all the great Scottish links, the Ailsa course is the most dramatic. During 2 world wars, a course had been leveled for use as an airfield, and then faithfully restored. A gentle giant. That's the native Scottish Clydesdale, 17 hands high and weighing close to a ton. Originally, Clydesdales were bred for hard work. Today, they're trained for a more genteel life. Clydesdales have style.
Hill farms grace the southeastern landscape. As sacred as this soil is to the Scots, its yields in produce are sometimes small. So the farmers here have always looked to livestock as a prime source of income. A Hieland Coo, a specimen of that shaggy native breed of Highland cattle, so at home on heaths and moors.
Greatest yield of the Scottish farms is the ploughman poet Robert Burns. Burns wrote in broad Scots dialect for plain people.
A man's a man for all that.
A lusty fellow, he wrote of his love of women.
Oh, my love is like a red, red rose.
And of his loathing of pretense and hypocrisy.
A fig for those by law protected. Liberty's a glorious feast.
Because he was their champion, he is the poet of earthy men and women the world over. His portraits appeared even on a postage stamp in Romania. A family Bible holds a record of his birth in 1759 in this cottage to a farming family in Alloway. The first 7 years of his life were spent in these rooms. This is a manuscript of Holy Willie's Prayer, signed in Burns' own hand. At this cottage in Dumfries, the poet died of a rheumatic heart at age 37 and was buried with honors in St. Michael's Churchyard. Near the old Brigadoon, bridge over the River Doon, stands a monument honoring him. In our day, people everywhere are quoting Robert Burns when they sing,
We'll take a cup of kindness yet for old Lang Syne.
River Clyde is the prime waterway to the heart of Scotland, and Glasgow is the country's biggest city, 3rd largest in the British Isles. But from Glasgow, it's only a short excursion to Loch Lomond. There's a saying in Scotland, though Edinburgh is the capital, Glasgow is where the capital is. From the Industrial Revolution through the grim years after World War II, Glasgow was an urban nightmare. a smoke-choked city with the toughest neighborhoods in Britain's worst slums.
And warrens of children, their little faces painted with soot and grime. Fueled by some sound planning and the dry, irreverent wit that Glaswegians are known for, the city underwent a spectacular transformation. Today, Glasgow is the Cinderella city of Britain.
Glasgow has been university town for the past 500 years, but today Glaswegians are calling it Culture City. Ship owner Sir William Burrell willed his fabulous collection, which includes priceless stained glass and Chinese ceramics, to the city. Now it's housed in a stunningly modern museum building in Glasgow's Greenbelt. It's the big summertime holiday here. The Glasgow Fair has been celebrated ever since 1190.
Today's urchins, who've never had to scrub off the soot and grime that smudged their grandparents, submit to face painting with the Cinderella colors of the city.
A beautiful wooded valley between two lakes, the Trussocks, robber's roost for the heroic outlaw Rob Roy, who was glorified in a novel by Sir Walter Scott. It's a short trip from Glasgow. The Trussocks are best viewed from a passenger steamer that plies the waters of Loch Katrine. The ship is well named, the Sir Walter Scott. And it's Loch Katrine that's the setting for Scott's Lady of the Lake. Even closer to Glasgow is Loch Lomond. Dubbed the Queen of the Lochs, she's set majestically in the realm of forest and mountains. Of all the lakes in Caledonia, Loch Lomond is the most celebrated in song. Travelers yearning to traverse the wilds of Scotland while ensconced in the lap of luxury can board the Royal Scotsman. It's the most luxurious train in the world, crisscrossing Scotland under Steam Hall. The 6-day tour it offers is a luxury travel experience. 28 guests, yes, pampered guests, not passengers, reside on board. In the British Isles, rolling stock is called a railway carriage, not a railroad car. Well, these indeed are carriages, vintage carriages, restored to their Victorian and Edwardian glories. The dining carriage is the oldest in the world, still in service. It was built in 1891. Chefs are masters. Service impeccable. But the outstanding attraction, viewed from these posh interiors, is Scotland itself. Thrusting in all seasons into the Western Highlands, the lovely harbor town of Oban, brooding Glencoe, Glenfinnan on Loch Shiel, and tragic Culloden Moor. Each season in Scotland has its own special sights and sounds, its own appeal.
The 0600 hours to Malling will leave from platform 6, calling at
Steam trains of the Western Railway departing year-round from Glasgow make it possible to explore the Highlands comfortably, in any weather. You're never far from the water. The train stops at towns and hamlets, even Junction. Some where the station master doubles as postmaster. Trains run every weekday, but never on the Sabbath. Oban's busy harbor is the finest on the Highland seaboard. It was the railway that made the town of Oban, along with the advent of steamboats. From the rugged Argyll coastline, arriving at this narrow valley, Glen Cove. Here, the traveler speaks in whispers. In a winter's dawn in 1692, government soldiers of the Argyll Regiment, who had accepted the hospitality of the MacDonald clan here, brutally slaughtered every MacDonald under 70, men, women, and bairns. It is called the Glen of Weeping. It seems that the pain of this event still rises in this brooding valley. Some 15 miles to the north is Fort William, a main base for climbers determined to scale Ben Nevis, Scotland's own Big Ben, at 4,406 feet, the highest mountain in the British Isles. With winter's blasts, herds of stag migrate to the lower reaches in their search for food. Mallaig is a takeoff point for a region drenched in Scottish history, its glories and its tragedies. In 1707, a union was forged between Scotland and England. England's Cross of St. George was superimposed over Scotland's Cross of St. Andrew, forming with the old flag of Ireland the Union Jack. To many of the Highland clans, this union was a shotgun wedding. There were years of quashed efforts to reseat a Scottish Stuart on the throne of this United Kingdom, a throne in Westminster Abbey now held by the House of Hanover. Good-looking and tragically reckless, Charles Edward Stuart had been born in Rome. Since boyhood, he'd been called Bonnie Prince Charlie. He grew up driven by a single steely aim in life, to regain the throne for the House of Stuart. To that end, he sailed to Scotland and rallied the clans to his cause at Glenfinnan on the shores of Loch Shiel. It sparked the glorious rebellion of 1745. The showdown came on Dranmossy Moor in Culloden, where Prince Charlie's Highlanders were cut to pieces by the Duke of Cumberland's artillery. For the clans, Culloden marked the end of the Highland way of life. But Charlie escaped and lived for 42 years after Culloden. He died a broken man. The legend of Bonnie Prince Charlie looms larger in Scottish national consciousness than the man who bore that name. He's idealized in sweet pain. The sovereignty never attained. The fight well fought, but unwon. Stretching along the rugged west coast is a chain of fabled islands, the Hebrides. In fact, there are two groups of islands, the Inner Hebrides and the Outer Hebrides, often called the Western Islands. Mull, beautiful Mull, is one of the Inner Isles. Mull sometimes serves as a jumping-off place for the most sacred of the Scottish Isles, Iona.
To some, just setting foot here is the beginning of a pilgrimage. It was to Iona that St. Columba sailed from Ireland some 1,400 years ago. The abbey that he founded became one of the most influential in Europe. 48 Scottish, 4 Irish, and 8 Norwegian kings, as well as numerous clan chiefs, are buried in Iona's holy soil, which, it is believed, expurgates all sins.
Six miles north of Iona is tiny Staffa, an uninhabited island of bizarre rock formations. This black maw is the gaping mouth of a cave named after Fingal, a Celtic hero. Its echoes of the crashing sea inspired Felix Mendelssohn to compose one of his best-known overtures, Fingal's Cave. Over the sea to Skye, a big island sky, 50 miles long, shrouded in clouds of Celtic mist. It's a place of many moods and colors. So irregular is this island's coast that no place is more than a few minutes from the sea. About 12,000 people live on this island. In times past, the main occupation was crofting, that is, small farming on this rocky soil. You can visit an old croft as it was then, sparse furnishings and plain. And an open Bible, printed in the Gaelic language. More than half of the island's people speak Gaelic as their everyday language, and one of the prides of Skye is its Gaelic College. Of the Outer Hebrides, Lewis holds stretches of stark moorlands, a few peat bog groves, and fewer trees. Crofting and fishing provide livelihoods. The people here were fiercely loyal to Bonnie Prince Charlie. This island loomed large in the lives of some prehistoric people, for here stands a circle of ritual stones, something like Stonehenge. No one certain why they're here. The southerly isle is Harris. The name is found in most every wardrobe where British woolens are prized. Harris tweed. It's a cottage industry here, a traditionally hand-woven tweed of water-shedding wool. Though with today's innovative pedals to work a loom, it could be called foot-woven.
This venerable lady is a last holdout. She's weaving the way the old folks did, doubly guaranteeing the qualities that have earned Harris its worldwide reputation. Her homeland, her Scotland, is much like her tweed. Coarse at times, in a homespun kind of way, but warm and comfortable when worn close to the heart.
Most Scottish woolens are less quaintly produced. There's a world market for them, and supply could never meet the demand if it were otherwise. Scotland is one vast grazing ground for sheep. Even in large cities, it's often sheep that keep the turf trim on the golf courses. And in the countryside, a visitor counts many more sheep than people. There's evidence of them everywhere. Snagged wool wherever you look. They even devour the morning paper. Overworked shepherds look to their dogs for help. Commanding the dogs in a complex language of whistles, flocks are moved from one pasture to another. Because of its wet, raw climate, Scottish sheep grow protective coats of remarkable depth and quality. Fleecing is a springtime ritual. Maybe it's the whirring of the power shears or the soothing hands of the shearers. But shearing mesmerizes the sheep. Inverness, the River Ness, and Loch Ness, home of the controversial monster. These are the Northern Highlands, stretching as far north as the road goes. John O'Groats. A chief town of the Highlands is Inverness, which claims the title the Highlands' natural capital. Macbeth had a castle here once, from which he ruled for 17 years. Inverness holds its Highland gathering in July. But these gatherings are in vogue all over Scotland, about 100 in all, held sometime between May and mid-September. Sporting events or games are traditional and often referred to as the Oatmeal Olympics. Originally, the games were used for selecting bodyguards for a Highland chief or for a king. In times past, they awarded baldricks, warriors' belts, as trophies. Today, it's silver cups. It's girls, rarely over 18, and often as young as 3 or 4, who compete in the dance events. Coursing through an area of Inverness is the Caledonian Canal, a waterway from the Atlantic Ocean to the North Sea, and a triumph of early 19th century engineering. During summer, it's plied by pleasure boats. Of the natural lakes that make up much of that waterway, Loch Ness is notorious, not for the ruins of the 12th century Castle Urquhart, projecting into the loch on a tongue of land, but because of the monster whose home is this cold, incredibly deep, biggest body of fresh water in Britain. Early chronicles say that St. Columba sighted the monster in the 6th century, and there have been many more sightings in the past 1,400 years. Some have been sworn to by people unlikely to fib just for the publicity. First photo ever made of what is claimed to be the monster was taken in 1933 by a vacationing surgeon. Now everyone's trying to get a shot at Nessie, as the monsters come to be called, with no little affection. From a TV crew from Japan to an American one-man submarine. Here's a photo made in 1972, with Nessie looking rather lumpy. Whether Nessie originates from the bottom of the loch or from the bottom of a bottle, let the visitor take heed. This monster may be a bafflement to scientists, but it's a bonanza to the local merchants. So, dear visitors, confine your doubts to whispers until you're shouting distance from Loch Ness. River Spey flows to the Moray coast, which stretches eastward from Inverness. In fishing villages named with knockabout syllables, Rosehearty, Portknocky, and Banff, the family wash is drying on the clothesline. So is the family meal. Were you to order whiskey anywhere in the world except Ireland, Canada, and the U.S., you'd be served Scotch whiskey. Perhaps that accounts for the popularity of the whiskey trail tours with some visitors. Though it's been tried, and with great expense, Scotch whiskey cannot be made outside of Scotland. The old histories claimed that missionary monks were its first distillers. In 1494, it was chronicled as the water of life. Indeed, the soft water of the Highlands is a vital ingredient. For a Scotch to be sold legally, it must have been casked for at least 3 years. While maturing in the casks, whiskey evaporates quite a bit. Really, then, all a visitor needs to do is breathe in. The road north ends at Caithness, where a Dutchman named Jan de Groot once ran a ferry from the mainland to Orkney. His fine Dutch name became John O'Groats to the Scots, designating the most northerly point in Britain, 874 miles from Land's End in the extreme south of England. The archipelago of 67 islands called Orkney, meaning Seal Islands in Old Norse, and the 100 or so remote islands called Shetland, of which a dozen are inhabited, are the northernmost outposts of the British Isles. Travelers today don't always bother with the ferry for island hopping in Orkney. There's a scheduled airline that operates between Westry and Papa Westry, carrying school kids, pets, and the mail. It's the world's shortest commercial flight, 1 minute, 45 seconds. The Ring of Brodgar, this circle of mute stones, is a monument of the nameless people who dwelt here some 6,000 years ago. Skara Brae isn't quite so old. In 1850, a storm had uncovered a few telltale stones. This triggered an excavation. Slowly it emerged, a Neolithic settlement 5,000 years old. Dwellings, passageways, even underground sewers. They've called Skara Brae the Pompeii of Britain. Kirkwall began as a Viking trading post and grew to become a center of Nordic Christianity. Now it's the Orkney capital. These islands belonged to Norway until the end of the 15th century. And until the end of the 1800s, Norwegian was the language spoken here. This old fishing port, Stromness, was the final port of call for ships of the Hudson Bay Company. During World War II, after a German submarine penetrated the Scapa Flow and sank a British battleship, Italian prisoners of war were made to build these barriers, called the Churchill Barriers, to seal off the flow. But these barriers weren't the only thing those Italians were building. On Lamb Home, out of scrap metal and other bits and pieces they could scrounge, those homesick Italian POWs built this lovely chapel. "148 miles northeast of Orkney lies Shetland, consisting of 100 sea-worn islands. Hills clad in broom and heather, and countless birds nesting in the cliffs. Though birds are in abundance, people are scarce. The 2,300 Shetlanders regard themselves as Norse rather than Scottish or British. Indeed, the nearest mainland settlement is Bergen, Norway. They're outnumbered 8-1, the Shetlanders, by sheep. Shetland has given its name to a respected breed of sheepdog, the Sheltie, as well as to a shaggy, pint-sized horse, the Shetland pony. Millions of people sat in a saddle for the first time at a Shetland pony ride in a park. Aberdeen and Dundee, the two major cities of eastern Scotland, are only 70 miles apart. In the backyards between them, there's a lifetime of vistas. Then, a short jaunt to Fife, the holy land of golf. Who has not heard of the granite city, Aberdeen? Granite in the glistening stone the city is built of, such as Marischal College, where the sparkling stone has been made to resemble lace. Granite in the flinty character of its people. Aberdeen exudes self-assurance and prosperity. It's the capital of Scotland's fishing industry. At the crack of dawn, fish brokers, wholesalers, buyers, and merchants, all charged with a new day's energy, are bartering in a language understood only by those in the trade. They're a shrewd lot, but then, so are the gulls. The same early morning might find a chopper taking off from Aberdeen, a city which had easily assumed the role of the oil capital of Europe. Destination, North Sea Platform 703. Platform 703 is a drilling rig. 200 lives are at stake here. Back when, it was assumed that the impact of the North Sea oil discovery would cure all of Scotland's economic ills. It hasn't. In the meantime, some must be content to count their blessings in barrels. Taking its name from this spine of mountains, Grampian is Scotland's northeastern shoulder. An unusually high number of royal warrants are displayed by the tradesmen of this village. That means that they're supplying goods or services to the royal family. It's no wonder. Balmoral Castle is nearby. When Queen Victoria beheld this area, she exclaimed,
"This dear paradise."
So her devoted husband and consort, Prince Albert, built her this storybook castle in the Scottish baronial style, Balmoral. But it's the 13th century Blair Castle that smacks genuinely of feudal Scotland. This whited stronghold is the home of the Duke of Atholl, the only citizen in Britain with the right to maintain a private army, the Atholl Highlanders. Tayside gushes with cataracts and rushing streams, chilling the boots of fly-fishing sportsmen, before emptying into Loch Tay, which has the source of River Tay at its foot. In long neat rows in the Tayside valleys, raspberries are grown for the jam factories of Dundee. Dundee is Tayside's big town, known for its jams and marmalades. But there's more to Dundee than preserves. There's preservation. Victoria Dock harbors the RRS Discovery, which carried Captain Robert Scott's 1901 expedition to the Antarctic.
Freshwater pearls from River Tay have been treasured for centuries. They grace the crown jewels of Scotland, of England. They've been recovered from the ruins of ancient Rome. This Tayside pearl fisher searches patiently for his pearl of great price.
The equipment is all you need is a fork stick and a glass-bottomed bucket and a sack to put the shells in and a good pair of waders. That's your equipment. That's your technology. Now here's a shell here that it's twisted. There's a pearl in this one, you know before you open it. There you are, there's a good pearl in this one. Lift it out with your fingers and put it in your mouth and put it under your tongue. That's the safest place to keep them.
Glamis Castle, with its crenellated battlements, dates mainly to the 17th century. But there was a castle here 1,000 years before that. Shakespeare had made this site the setting for Macbeth.
All hail, Thane of Glamis!
Home to the Earls of Strathmore, it's as close to a fairy tale castle as any in Scotland. It was at Glamis that Princess Margaret was born. Her mother, now the Queen Mother, was Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon of the House of Strathmore. The man she'd marry was the Duke of York, who, because of his older brother's abdication, would become King George VI. But they were a giant step from the throne when this snapshot was taken. She had no notion then that her firstborn, Elizabeth, would one day be queen. This is the present Lady Strathmore, seated in the wing reserved for the Queen Mother's visits.
Hello. I'm Mary, Countess of Strathmore, and I would like to welcome you very warmly indeed to Glamis Castle. Glamis is steeped in history and has very many beautiful rooms, but I am now sitting in one of my very favourite rooms, which is known as the Queen Mother's sitting room.
There's a sort of castle, a Scottish palace in the glens, where everyone is treated like royalty. The Glen Eagles Hotel stands tall in the Perthshire landscape. An all-round sports resort, its moorland courses are regarded as a golfer's dream. The hotel itself offers the kind of pampering that a true sportsman shouldn't need, but likes. This is a Scottish breakfast. Bought separately, it works out to about 5 pounds, and that's just the weight gain. Fife juts jauntily into the North Sea, its coastline notched with picturesque harbors ending at the fishing village of Crail. Crail's become something of a holiday resort. But Fife's history centers in St. Andrews, once a cathedral town and the seat of Scotland's oldest university. Today, St. Andrews is a shrine, not for its religious significance, but for the cult of the green turf. Serious golfers are drawn to St. Andrews like pilgrims. Here, the old course, laid out in the 15th century, holds the highest place among the courses of the world. The Royal and Ancient Golf Club, formed in 1754, is the world's guardian of the rules of the game. St. Andrews Course is a links, a sandy, undulating piece of land bordering the seashore. It's the quintessential Scottish course. Passing from Fife through the Firth of Forth, we've roughly circled back to our starting point, the festival city of Edinburgh. Firth is a word the Scots use for a long, narrow inlet from the sea. And here is where the sea meets the River Forth. 2 great bridges span the Firth of Forth. The railway bridge, begun in 1883, is a marvel of 19th century engineering. The road bridge was opened in 1964. This is a gateway to Edinburgh. Drifting with a morning mist to where it all started. Majestic Edinburgh, the true capital of Scotland in the heart of every Scotsman. It's been almost 1,400 years since the first settlers arrived on this volcanic ridge, where through distant centuries, a fortified town arose stretching from Castle Rock to the palace of Holyrood House. That was the thimble size of Edinburgh when a striking young widow arrived here some 400 years ago. Mary Stuart, Queen of the Scots, almost 6 feet tall and every inch of her a queen.
Mary was brought into the world on a wintry day in 1542, here at the palace at Linlithgow. Her royal father, King James V, lay dying here in Falkland Palace, praying for a son. When he learned that it was not a boy,
Woe is me. My dynasty came with a lass, it will go with a lass.
6 days later, he died. Mary was hardly a year old when at Stirling Castle she was crowned queen. She grew up romping in this garden. Hers was a joyful disposition. She loved dancing, hunting, playing golf. Yes, Mary of Scotland had a sense of fun. When she was 15, she was married in Paris to the Dauphin of France, who was a year younger. They grew fond of each other. And when her young husband died 2 years later, Mary wrote,
By day, by night, I think of him. My heart keeps watch for one who's gone.
Returning to Scotland, she began her reign honestly and fearlessly. Her tolerance was unique among the rulers of her time. A Catholic herself, Mary dealt fairly and without bigotry towards subjects of different religions. A royal steward, Lord Darnley, became her second husband, and Mary reigned from Holyrood through 6 years of affronts to her power. She had been pregnant for 6 months, when in this room, in front of her eyes, her secretary, David Rizzio, was murdered in cold blood. So that the shock would kill both queen and heir in premature childbirth is what many believed. If that was true, the plot failed. In this chamber in Edinburgh Castle, Mary did give birth to a son. The child lived, so did the mother. He was christened James. Now Lord Darnley, her child's weak, conniving father, was strangled by those conspiring against her. Mary found herself a woman alone in a lair of power-hungry nobles. Despite her marriage to the Earl of Bothwell, at their urging, her nobles imprisoned her in Lochleven Castle, where she was pressured into signing away her crown in favor of her infant son. But the dauntless queen engineered an escape from Lochleven and embarked for England to plead with her cousin, Queen Elizabeth, for help. On 16 May of 1568, she sailed from this shore for England. Elizabeth never met her, queen to queen. Rather, she imprisoned Mary for the next 19 years, and then had her condemned to death for conspiring against her person.
I have not procured nor encouraged any hurt against Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth.
When Elizabeth signed Mary's death warrant, she was already 53 years old, an increasingly homely woman under her flaming red wigs, and she was barren. Mary of Scotland had always loved animals, particularly dogs. When she marched so bravely, so calmly to the block, her pet terrier was seen peering from under the skirts of her gown. She stretched herself at length, laid her neck on the block, commending herself to God. It took the axeman 3 horrid strokes. One of Mary of Scotland's mottos was prophetic. In my end is my beginning. Elizabeth died childless. It was Mary's son, James VI of Scotland, who succeeded to the English throne as James I of England, the first of the House of Stuart, whose bloodline infuses Britain's royal family of today.
It's here at Holyrood that direct descendant of Mary's resides when she's in Edinburgh, the sovereign of the United Kingdom. Her Majesty enters the forecourt of Holyrood to receive the key to Edinburgh from the Lord Provost. Mary, Queen of Scots, had hoped earnestly that Scotland and England might be ruled from the same throne. Today, that hope is realized in Queen Elizabeth, the first Queen Elizabeth of Scotland, the second of England. Her roots draw deeply from the Scottish past. This queen belongs to Scotland every bit as much as she belongs to England. The spine of the ancient city, running from Holyrood House to Edinburgh Castle, is a stretch of road that packs the scope of Scottish history into 1 royal mile. "200 years ago, a bet was made by a pair of old Edinburgh golfers. Who would be the first to drive a ball over the crown steeple of St. Giles, the mother church of the Church of Scotland? Perhaps the ball struck the nearby statue of John Knox, Scotland's religious reformer, who'd cast a jaundiced eye on golf. At the west end of the Royal Mile, the towers and turrets of Edinburgh Castle, perched on an outcrop of volcanic rock. A hallowed stronghold that throughout the centuries grew to become a sprawling complex of batteries and barracks, palaces and prisons. It is still a working castle and headquarters for the Scottish division of Her Majesty's Army. If there is a national shrine in Scotland, it is this castle. Within its walls are housed the Scottish crown jewels. There are elements in the Golden Crown that date to 1306. The sword and scepter were gifts from Roman popes to Mary, Queen of Scots' grandfather. This is the oldest royal regalia in Europe. The lake that once lapped at Castle Rock had been drained, providing a fertile soil bed for Princes Street Gardens, the most spacious and elegant park in Scotland. Bordering the gardens is Princes Street itself, a splendid mile-long boulevard for shopping and promenading, landmarked by this spiky monument to Sir Walter Scott, nicknamed the Gothic Rocket. Old Edinburgh had been a walled-in city, so it had to build up like a medieval Manhattan. The expanding city had to escape its walls. So the city stretched over the valley, and in a green field, the building of Newtown began. Built between 1766 and 1840, Newtown is a model of urban planning. Shaded squares and elegant streets and crescents, lined by splendid Georgian houses. Alexander Graham Bell was born at Charlotte Place, and Robert Louis Stevenson lived at Harriet Row. The outburst of creativity that built Newtown launched the Scottish Enlightenment. The arts flourished, and the sciences. Edinburgh glowed in its international reputation as the Athens of the North. Such far-flung fame was earned by Edinburgh's medical schools that the plots of medicinal herbs cultivated for study grew to become the city's vast botanical gardens. Indeed, the city's renowned for the giants of medicine it has produced.
Another botanically related medical breakthrough was Alexander Fleming's discovery of penicillin. And over here, one November evening in 1847, a young Edinburgh professor caused his guests to fall unconscious under the dining room table there, because this was the home of James Simpson, the pioneer of chloroform and the deep sleep of anesthesia.
This is proud Edinburgh, of which Robert Louis Stevenson, a native son, wrote,
This profusion of eccentricities, this dream of masonry and living rock is not a dropsy, but a city in the world of everyday reality.
But like Stevenson's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, this city has a murky alternate personality. This was particularly evident in the last century. It was then that two seemingly respectable fellows, William Burke and William Hare, stalked the gloomy wynds and closes in search of victims, unsuspecting citizens to strangle. They then sell their corpses to the medical schools for a pretty penny. In our waning century, Edinburgh after dark is more frolicsome than fearsome. There are elegant pubs for a wee dram, and restaurants glowing with tradition. And for brave visitors, the rugged national dish, haggis, a mince of entrails, oatmeal, and poetry.
Trench in your gusset entrails brecht like onny ditch. Then, oh, what a wondrous sight! If you wish her grateful prayer, be her haggis.
Once initiated to the haggis, visitors are regaled by Old Scotland. Each August, the city explodes with the Edinburgh International Festival, the biggest and most momentous arts festival on earth. Theater troupes, opera companies, dance ensembles, and string quartets cram every auditorium, church hall, and makeshift theater within reach of the central city. And when this night tilts into tomorrow, the batteries of floodlights are dimmed out, leaving a single shaft on a solitary piper on the battlements. Somehow, heard in the pipe's plaintive skirl is Scotland, its pain and heroism and glory. Scotland, the bonny. Scotland, the brave.